The $14 billion lie hiding in America's drugstore. She reaches for extra strength relief, the red box promising clear sinuses by lunch. 2 aisles over, a sunscreen claims broad spectrum. The baby powder says gentle. Meanwhile, in Paris, that acne cream is pharmacy only, and in Tokyo, that sunscreen formula is years ahead. One detail that will matter later. A US panel just said the main pill decongestant works no better than a placebo. Same symptoms, different countries, different rules. To see why America's drugstore looks the way it does, and why Europe and Japan say no to what we say yes, we have to follow the rule book as it was written. 2 pharmacies, 2 philosophies. Walk into a big box US store and you're not just in an aisle, you're in a museum of decisions. Over the counter here means a product fits an FDA rule set called GRASE, generally recognized as safe and effective under a monograph or an administrative order post-2020. That word, recognized, does a lot of lifting. Many categories were built decades ago when evidence standards and manufacturing realities looked different. If an ingredient made it into a monograph, companies could use it without filing a new application each time, as long as they followed the recipe. That sped shelves up. It also froze some judgments in amber. Across the Atlantic, the vibe is different. The EU leans on the precautionary principle. If there's plausible risk with limited benefit, regulators tighten first and argue later. Cosmetics are governed by a sweeping rule, the Cosmetics Regulation, that bans or restricts thousands of substances and demands safety assessments for every product. For chemicals generally, REACH flips the burden. Industry has to prove safety before broad use, not the other way around. In practice, that means European shelves look cleaner on paper, but move slower when new molecules show up. Japan adds its own twist. The Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare keeps positive lists of what's allowed in cosmetics and quasi-drugs, those in-between products like medicated sunscreens and dandruff shampoos. If it isn't listed, it isn't going in, at least not without a formal process. That conservative stance, plus pharmacy-only categories, means a lot of actives sit behind a counter or in approved concentrations that look modest to Americans. Meanwhile, the US grew up on a split screen. Prescription drugs require pre-market approval with robust data, but OTCs often ride monographs. Big rulebooks updated glacially through notice and comment. Old standbys were grandfathered. When science changed, the paperwork struggled to catch up. That's how something like a decongestant swap could happen quickly in packaging but slowly in evidence. A gap will hit soon. Here's a human moment. A student lands in Amsterdam with a suitcase acne routine, a face wash labeled with an active he's used since high school. He scans a pharmacy shelf and can't find it. The clerk shrugs. That ingredient isn't allowed over the counter here in that strength. He messages friends, "My face wash is banned." It isn't exactly banned, it's regulated differently. But to him, the shelf just changed the rules. What nobody in that airport bathroom knew is that a lot of familiar US approvals come from legacy determinations built when trials were small, endpoints were fuzzy, or the class was judged as a whole. Over time, we layered labels and warnings, but the monograph model kept the factory lights on. Then modern reviews started testing assumptions with better methods. Sometimes the old calls held, sometimes they cracked. The EU's approach created its own trade-offs. When regulators questioned a chemical family, say certain parabens in cosmetics, they set concentration caps or bans for specific members with stronger endocrine activity, even before perfect human data. That avoided potential harm but forced reformulations and cost. Japanese rules can be even tighter. An active might be fine, but only at low levels and with a pharmacist's advice. The upside is control. The downside is access. In the US, the culture of self-selection runs the show. Big signage, bright promises, fine print. You pick, you pay, you try, you learn. Consumer freedom feels good until it collides with ingredients that don't deliver, risks that weren't obvious, or contaminants nobody saw coming. When that happens, the American system leans on recalls, black box warnings, or lawsuits to force change. Europe and Japan often gatekeep earlier via approvals and positive lists. There's also the pace problem. Sunscreen tells the story bluntly. Europe and Japan added cutting-edge UV filters years ago, while the US kept working through an FDA pathway that demanded strong safety dossiers for dermally applied filters that might be used daily for decades. Companies had the data, just not in the format or extent FDA wanted. The Sunscreen Innovation Act tried to speed things up. It didn't unlock the door fast enough. We'll see what that means on skin. Inside this split are two sets of stakes. For people, trust and outcomes, clear noses, safe babies, skin that's protected without trade-offs. For companies, speed to market and simplicity versus retooling and relabeling. For regulators, move too fast and you miss harm. Move too slow and consumers import their own fixes or stick with weaker products. The philosophical line shows up in categories you don't expect. Oral care in the US kept an antibacterial ingredient long after hand soaps lost it. Europe cut earlier, Japan was cautious from the start. Hydroquinone for skin lightening lingered OTC here for years and then exited under a reform law, while the EU kept it far from aisle. Decongestants swapped names on boxes when meth laws tightened, and only later did a scientific review say, out loud, that the replacement likely didn't work at standard doses. While that was happening in New York, a pharmacist in Dublin pointed a customer to a counter-only option with a quick conversation. Heart history, blood pressure, driving, that model expects gatekeeping to prevent misuse. The US expects labels to carry that weight and lawsuits to backstop failures. This is the moment everything changes for our story. Once you see that the aisle is built on ingredients, not brands, you start noticing which molecules are allowed where, at what dose, and under which evidence standard. Some quietly disappeared. Others stuck around through momentum. A few were pushed out by new laws with boring acronyms that actually matter. MoCRA for cosmetics, the CARES Act restructuring OTCs, DSHEA shaping the supplement universe. That alphabet soup isn't decoration. It's the reason your cart looks the way it does, and why the next chapter starts with a red box that never really cleared your nose. The phenylephrine collapse. Cold season feels like triage. Parents doing math at 2 a.m., workers staring at a meeting invite with a nose like concrete, caregivers hoping one tiny pill buys a few hours of quiet breathing. That red box promised relief without a prescription, without drowsiness, without a hassle. The stakes weren't abstract. They were the difference between sleeping and staring at the ceiling. To understand what happened, go back to 2005. The U.S. passed the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act, which shoved Pseudoephedrine, an effective oral decongestant, behind the counter. Same drug, but now you needed ID limits and a pharmacist to hand it over because meth cooks wanted it too. Companies pivoted fast. They reformulated marquee brands with phenylephrine, a related molecule that could still sit on open shelves. The packaging barely changed. The store planograms didn't either. The chemistry did. For years, pharmacists had a quiet joke. Phenylephrine in pills doesn't do much for noses. It's a potent vasoconstrictor when sprayed locally, but swallowed at standard doses, it got chewed up by the gut and liver. Patients came back saying, "Did I do something wrong?" The answer was awkward. No, you followed the label. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Academic groups kept probing whether the oral dose on labels actually moved the needle. Small trials hinted at minimal benefit. The FDA's Non-Prescription Drugs Advisory Committee kept an eye on it, but the monograph system made change slow. The assumption was baked in. If it's GRASE, it works at labeled doses. Then the evidence hit critical mass. In 2023, FDA scientists pulled together old and new data, including well-controlled studies that used modern congestion measurements. Their conclusion landed like a thud. At standard oral doses, phenylephrine isn't effective as a nasal decongestant. An advisory committee voted unanimously that the evidence didn't support the benefit people were buying. The red boxes we all knew. For many, they were placebo with branding. Inside a suburban pharmacy, a tech watched live updates on her phone and exhaled. She'd been telling regulars to ask for the behind-the-counter stuff if they could tolerate it, but not everyone could or would. High blood pressure, jitteriness, job requirements, pseudoephedrine isn't for everyone, and some folks didn't want the ID check, the line, the conversation. The shelf option was supposed to be the compromise. It was. Across the Atlantic, the story diverged. Europe didn't lean on oral phenylephrine the way the US did after 2005. Pseudoephedrine stayed available but pharmacy-gated with tighter counseling. Some EU markets stock phenylephrine, but it wasn't the default swap in the same way, and combination cold products often followed different playbooks. In practice, the European counter kept a human in the loop. The American aisle kept a promise on the box. What nobody in the aisle knew at the time was how sticky a monograph can be. Once an ingredient is in, changing course takes more than a hunch. It takes a formal review, compelling data, and the bureaucratic will to rewrite labels across an industry. Meanwhile, marketing marched on, non-drowsy, max strength, fast relief. Sales stayed strong because habits do. This was the moment everything changed. When the FDA committee spoke plainly, shoppers started asking harder questions. Class action lawyers noticed too. Suits argued consumers paid for a benefit they didn't get. Retailers began nudging brands toward reformulation. Some companies pulled SKUs or reworked combos. The phrase, "no better than placebo," turned into a trust cliff. In the aftermath, there was a scramble for alternatives. Nasal sprays with topical decongestants, they work, but risk rebound congestion if overused. Saline rinses, safe but not magic. Antihistamines help if allergies are the driver, not a virus. And there was the old workhorse behind the counter, pseudoephedrine, with real efficacy and real limits, insomnia, palpitations, and those purchase caps. From a consumer's perspective, the ripple was simple. Money spent for years on a pill that likely wasn't helping. From a regulatory perspective, it was a reminder that legacy status doesn't equal current proof. From industry's seat, it was a reformulation problem and a messaging headache. The human part sticks. A mom in Ohio stopped buying red boxes and started timing pharmacy runs for pseudoephedrine before daycare pickup. A pharmacist in Arizona taped a printout to the counter. Ask us which decongestant actually works. Not everyone can use it, not everyone should, but at least the conversation got honest. The phenylephrine collapse wasn't just about a molecule. It exposed how American shelves can fill with compromises when laws shift upstream and science lags in paperwork. It also showed the value of a painful, public correction. If the fix didn't fix it, what else in the aisle carries hidden trade-offs? Sunscreen, the American time capsule. While the decongestant boxes argued about relief, something quieter was happening on skin. Parents packed beach bags with broad-spectrum sunscreens, thinking they were covered from whatever the sun threw at them. The stakes were bigger than a day at the pool. In the US, skin cancer is the most common cancer. UVA burns less, it ages skin and drives melanoma risk. If your filter mix misses UVA, you miss the point. Here, S where the shelf splits. In Europe and Japan, companies sell sunscreens using modern filters that blunt UVA across a wider range. Tinosorb S and M, Mexoril SX, Uvinol A+, Uvinol T150, names that sound like lab projects, but matter if you're outside every day. These filters were cleared years ago under systems that treat high-use UV filters like quasi-drugs or cosmetics with pre-market dossier. In Tokyo, a lifeguard can walk into a drugstore and buy a Milk Light lotion that dries fast, doesn't sting, and quietly covers deep UVA. In Paris, a parent grabs a fluid with filters tuned to long-wave UVA, less chalk, fewer reapplications. Meanwhile, the US sat in a kind of time capsule. Our FDA doesn't treat new UV filters as simple cosmetic additives. Daily, lifelong exposure gets judged like a drug: percutaneous absorption, systemic exposure margins, carcinogenicity, reproductive toxicity, photostability, phototoxicity, the whole stack. That isn't wrong. People slather this stuff for decades. FDA wanted modern data, not 1980s summaries. The problem was tempo. Submissions trickled in without the depth FDA wanted. Industry said, these filters have real-world records in the EU and Japan. FDA said, show us human absorption, metabolite profiles, and margins of safety at US use patterns. Stalemate. In 2014, Congress tried to break it with the Sunscreen Innovation Act, a law aimed at speeding review of time and extent applications for filters used abroad. It came with clocks and a promise. If something's widely used with acceptable safety records, we'll move it through. Then FDA asked for new human absorption studies to meet modern standards. Some companies balked or took years. Others ran trials and found measurable systemic levels for some existing US filters, which raised, not lowered, the bar. The pipeline didn't unclog. By the late 2010s, American shelves still leaned on older filters like avobenzone for UVA, stabilized with octocrylene or oxybenzone, or they jumped to minerals, zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, rock solid on safety, but chalky and less elegant. What does that look like for a family in July? More white cast on darker skin tones if you want robust UVA with mineral formulas. More stinging eyes and sensitivity for some with chemical blends. More reapplication to chase stability. And sometimes, plain worse protection in the UVA 380-400 nm range compared to leading EU or Japanese products. That's why you see suitcases full of foreign sunscreen coming back from vacations, and why dermatologists whisper brand names from overseas when patients ask for the good stuff. Industry sits in the middle. Global companies sell advanced formulas in Europe and Asia, and a different lineup in the US. They argue the safety case is there if you accept global post-market data. FDA pushes for US standard prospective studies. Both positions make sense depending on which risk you fear more: approving a filter with unknown systemic effects or denying the public better UVA protection while melanoma rates climb. A lifeguard in San Diego solved it her own way. Every May, she orders a Japanese gel and a French fluid. She isn't chasing hype, she's chasing compliance. If the product feels invisible, she'll use a full shot glass amount and reapply every 2 hours on a 6-hour shift. If it pills under sweat or burns her eyes, she skimps. Protection on paper doesn't matter if it lives in the bottle. There's also a labeling wrinkle. Broad Spectrum in the US has a test behind it, but it's a floor, not a ceiling. A sunscreen can pass and still be weaker on long UVA than EU formulas that must meet higher UVA to UVB ratios. European labels often include the UVA circle mark or specific UVAPF, and Japan uses PA ratings with plus signs. Those signals help shoppers pick coverage that actually matches daily exposure. Meanwhile, mineral filters, zinc and titanium got better. Micronized forms spread easier, tints mask cast, and their UVA reach is strong. For many, the simplest answer is a tinted zinc sunscreen. It isn't fancy, it works. But people want options, especially for darker complexions and sweaty jobs. The elegance gap kept imports flowing. This is the moment everything changed for sunscreen in the American conversation. When consumers realized the US wasn't anti-innovation, it was stuck in a safety-first lane without a passing lane. The Sunscreen Innovation Act set the route. The cars didn't merge. MoCRA modernized cosmetics oversight in 2022, registration, safety substantiation, adverse event reporting. But it didn't unlock UV filters because filters live in the OTC drug world. The CARES Act in 2020, which reorganized OTC monographs into an administrative order process, offered a faster way to update categories. It still requires data, no shortcut around your bloodstream. So people hacked the aisle. They split routines, a US mineral base for safety comfort, a thin imported layer for feel and extra UVA. They read ingredient lists like menus. They learned that reef safe isn't a regulated term and that oxybenzone and octinoxate bans in some places target environmental, not human risk. They asked, if Europe trusts these filters, why don't we? The answer is simple and unsatisfying. Our bar is different and the dossiers aren't there yet. Until that changes, the safest bet is boring. Pick a sunscreen you'll use a lot, aim for strong UVA coverage, and reapply like it's medicine. Because in the end, it is. Cosmetics, dirty dozen. Ingredients the EU cut, the US didn't. Back in that sunscreen aisle, the labels hinted at another quiet split. What goes on your skin every day for years when nobody's sick and nobody's counting doses? That's where the EU's precaution meets the US lighter touch. On paper, cosmetics aren't drugs. In life, they're constant exposure. Start with the big lever. The EU's cosmetics regulation runs on negative and restricted lists, thousands of substances either banned outright or capped with tight conditions. Every finished product needs a safety assessment on file, a responsible person in the EU, and market surveillance that actually pulls items when something's off. The US for decades ran mostly on a short federal ban list, voluntary industry standards, and after-the-fact enforcement. Brands leaned on the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Panel, industry-funded scientists who assess safety. But CIR opinions aren't law. Until 2022, the FDA didn't even have mandatory facility registration or serious adverse event reporting. That changed with MoCRA, but it arrived after a long stretch where reformulation often followed European decisions, not American ones. So what actually left European shelves? Think families, not just villains. Formaldehyde and formaldehyde-releasing preservatives, DMDM hydantoin, imidazolidinolurea, diazolidinolurea, quaternium-15, showed up in shampoos and lotions for decades. They're effective at stopping microbes. They also release a known human carcinogen and sensitizer. The EU tightened, then closed the door on several releasers. The rest got squeezed into narrow uses with concentration limits and strict labeling. In the US, some of those releasers kept appearing until lawsuits, consumer pressure, and retailer no lists forced a migration to other preservatives. You can still find them in legacy products, especially outside big box shelves. Parabens tell the nuance. Not all parabens hit the same endocrine button. The EU allowed methyl and ethylparaben within limits, but banned or restricted isopropyl and isobutylparaben in leave-on products for infants and capped use elsewhere based on stronger estrogenic activity. The US never banned them federally. CIR judged common parabens safe at current levels, and FDA didn't move. European brands reformulated early to avoid the conversation. American brands often kept dual portfolios. Paraben-free for marketing, paraben present in older lines. Coal tar dyes are another fault line. The EU pushed out certain aromatic amine, releasing dyes and set tight purity specs, while US regulation leans on color additive approvals and batch certification for some dyes but allows others that activists target. For a makeup artist, it's less about chemistry tables and more about outcomes. After 2 clients developed rashes during wedding season, one artist we met dumped half her kit. She started reading NSAID lists like allergy chart. Out went formaldehyde releasers, certain coal tar dyes, and heavy fragrance. Her kit got simpler. Her callback slowed. She wasn't chasing trends, she was dodging reaction. Then there's Triclosan, the antibacterial that overstayed its welcome. The FDA banned it from consumer hand soaps in 2016 after determining it wasn't more effective than plain soap and water and raised safety and resistance questions. But it stayed in some US toothpastes longer because evidence showed benefit for gingivitis in that particular use. The EU cut earlier and wider, trimming Triclosan and checking other antimicrobials with a sharper knife. Japan kept approvals conservative, channeling these claims through quasi-drug routes. The lesson wasn't that US regulators were asleep. It's that category-by-category judgments allowed an ingredient to persist if the data in that niche supported it, even while it vanished elsewhere. PFAS, the forever chemicals, brought a new kind of worry. They weren't always intentionally added. Sometimes they were impurities from fluorinated processing or breakdown of certain ingredients. Reports found PFAS in waterproof mascaras and longwear products. The EU signaled crackdowns and moved toward sweeping restrictions under chemicals law, while some US states passed their own ban. Federally, MoCRA doesn't list PFAS by name, but it raises the floor. Brands must hold safety substantiation and report serious adverse events. Retailers again ran ahead, adding PFAS to do-not-use lists. Brands scrambled for slip, shine, and water resistance without fluorinated shortcuts. Fragrance is the biggest black box. Fragrance on a label can hide dozens of compounds. The EU requires disclosure of specific allergens, limonene, linalool, citral, and more, once they cross low thresholds because sensitization matters. In the US, you still see fragrance as a single line. MoCRA's coming fragrance allergen disclosure rule will narrow that gap, but it isn't live yet. Until then, consumers with dermatitis are guessing or buying European imports for clarity. Dose and exposure are the honest counterpoints. Toxicology lives on curves, not headlines. The EU often manages risk by elimination or tight caps, even when human risk at typical exposure is uncertain. The US prefers demonstrating harm before bans and trusts formulation expertise to control impurity levels. That difference looks small in memos and huge in bathrooms. If you shampoo daily, apply lotion twice, and wear makeup 8 hours, tiny risks stack into habit. That's why Europe's lists feel strict. They're controlling what's in the daily drumbeat. Why not just ban the bad stuff? Because replacements bring their own trade-offs. When brands pulled formaldehyde releasers, some moved to isothiazolinones, which can be potent sensitizers and also attracted EU limits, especially in leave-ons. Paraben-free launched 1,000 labels. Some substitutes weren't kinder to skin. Every subtraction needs a plan. Here's the pattern that repeats. Europe cuts earlier. Japan approves narrowly, the US lags, then shifts through lawsuits, retailer standards, or a slow federal move. MoCRA starts to change the posture. Mandatory registration, product listing, adverse event reporting, records access, fragrance allergen disclosure rules on deck, but it doesn't name 1,000 chemicals. It forces receipts, and receipts create leverage. For shoppers, the practical fallout is simple. Reformulations often happen first for Europe, then roll worldwide. US shelves can carry legacy lines longer, especially in discount channels. If your skin reacts, the fix isn't panic, it's information. Shorter INCI lists, fragrance-free variants, preservative systems that fit your history, and brands that publish full allergen breakdowns. That makeup artist now carries a card for clients. Here's what's in, here's what's out, here's why. It's not a clean crusade. It's a strategy for fewer bad days. This is where our aisle story turns from molecules to trust. Labels aren't lies, but they're not the last word either. When the difference between a rash and a good day lives in a line item, the rulebook you can't see decides what shows up in your cart. Talc, asbestos, and the baby aisle. The gentlest aisle has the softest marketing. Clouds, pastels, the word pure. For years, baby powder was the shorthand for clean, but geology doesn't read labels. Talc is mined from the earth, often near tremolite and other asbestos-forming minerals. If the vein runs close, contamination can happen. That's the simple, stubborn science. Co-occurrence underground can become co-exposure on skin. The stakes couldn't be higher when the users are mothers and infants. Talc itself is a hydrated magnesium silicate, soft, absorbent, inert when pure. Asbestos is a different family, fibrous forms that, when inhaled, can cause mesothelioma and other cancers. The question that split courtrooms and regulators wasn't whether asbestos is dangerous. It was whether cosmetic talc contained it, how often, and whether use patterns created risk. Testing turned into a fight about methods. U.S. cosmetic talc historically relied on standards that emphasized X-ray diffraction and polarized light microscopy, good at spotting larger particles, less sensitive for trace fibers. Electron microscopy can see more, but it also raises questions. Which fibers count as asbestos, what thresholds matter, and how do you avoid false positives from non-asbestiform lookalikes? Different labs, different calls. Companies said their talc met spec. Plaintiffs, experts said the spec missed what mattered at low levels. Meanwhile, epidemiology painted a mixed picture. Some case-control studies suggested an association between long-term perineal talc use and ovarian cancer. Cohort studies often found weaker or no associations, complicated by recall bias and exposure misclassification. Respiratory risks were clearer for occupational exposures, less so for consumer use. Regulators trailed the uncertainty. The FDA didn't set a binding asbestos limit for cosmetic talc. Instead, it updated drafts of testing recommendations and spot-tested products after media reports flagged contamination. Europe took a different path years earlier. Talc stayed in cosmetics with strict purity requirements and product safety assessments, but infant powders fell out of favor, and many brands reformulated or moved to cornstarch. Japan's conservative posture nudged the market away from talc in baby care entirely. Inside a boardroom, the corporate choice wasn't abstract. Keep talc and defend testing, or pivot to cornstarch and concede the narrative. Some brands discontinued talc-based baby powder in North America while maintaining sales elsewhere. Others switched outright. Publicly, they cited falling demand. Privately, litigation risk was swallowing budgets. A juror from a high-profile case explained what tipped the scale. It wasn't just science, it was internal memos, discussions about sourcing, lab methods, and the optics of changing tests. To her, the paper trail suggested doubt inside the building while ads promised certainty outside it. The verdict followed the feeling. If you suspect a risk and sell to babies, you move faster. Retailers read the room. Big chains added talc to their no lists for baby aisles, pushing store brands toward cornstarch. Plaintiffs filed waves of suits, some dismissed, others ending in headline judgments, many later reduced or overturned on appeal. The legal saga became its own ecosystem: mass tort ads, multi-district litigation, bankruptcy maneuvers. Through it all, a quiet consumer shift happened. New parents defaulted to cornstarch without waiting for a federal ban. Science didn't stand still. Independent labs found benzene in some aerosol sunscreens and dry shampoos, unrelated categories, same supply chain theme, contaminants hitchhiking through propellants and solvents. That broadened the lesson. Sometimes the danger isn't the ingredient, it's what rides along. Talc made that visible first because it's dug, milled, and blended. But any raw material with complex supply lines can bring baggage. In Europe, the regulatory framework helped earlier. The cosmetic safety assessor, the person legally responsible, has to sign off on purity and risk for each product, with documentation ready for inspectors. Rapid alert systems can yank batches across borders fast. In the US, until MoCRA, there was no mandatory product listing or serious adverse event reporting for cosmetics, and recalls were generally voluntary. MoCRA changes that posture. More oversight, more records, more accountability. But it arrived after talc's reputational collapse. A mother in Detroit summed up the consumer fix. If there's a clean cornstarch option next to talc and they do the same job, why gamble? That's the market pressure that regulators rarely articulate but always feel. Companies follow it too. The shift didn't answer every question about talc's risk at real-world exposure, but it lowered exposure anyway. The baby aisle's lesson isn't to panic, it's to respect geology and supply chains. Ask, what's the raw material? How is it tested? Is there a simpler substitute that avoids the argument entirely? When the product serves the most vulnerable, the tie shouldn't go to tradition. It should go to certainty. And that's why, if powders raised alarms, salons with heat and fumes were about to get louder. Hair straighteners, formaldehyde and heat. Salons smelled like vanilla and steam until the flat irons clamped and the sweet smell turned sharp. Stylists called it the Brazilian. Clients called it life-changing, and the air monitors, when someone bothered to bring them in, called it something else entirely. The stakes were real people breathing in a small room for 8 hours. Stylists with headaches, burning eyes, coughing fits, clients coming in every 3 months, teenagers trying to tame curls before prom, at-home kits promising salon results without the salon. Here's the chemistry nobody advertised. Many keratin or smoothing treatments relied on formaldehyde, a gas that can sting eyes and throat at low levels and is classified as a human carcinogen at high or chronic exposures. Some products added formaldehyde directly as methylene glycol in solution. Others used formaldehyde-free marketing while relying on aldehyde-releasing agents like methylene glycol, glyoxylylcarbocystine, or other chemistry that could release formaldehyde when heated. The iron at 450 degrees didn't just seal shine, it liberated fumes. In cramped back rooms, stylists learned the hard way. One Los Angeles stylist told us she used to prop the salon door with a trash can even in December. Her headaches started on blowout days. She tried masks, then stronger masks, then scheduling the treatments at the end of her shift. It helped until busy season. The clients loved their hair, less curl, less frizz, less time in the morning. The stylist loved her rent getting paid. She didn't love her lungs. Regulators moved on very different clocks. In the EU, formaldehyde as a preservative in cosmetics was pushed out of most uses, and hair smoothing products that emitted formaldehyde when used with heat hit bands or micro-thresholds through the cosmetics regulations annexes. Member states issued rapid alerts. Inspectors could seize product and fine salon. Japan's conservative approval model meant these high-heat, high-fume formulas never found easy footing. Quasi-drug routes and ingredient-positive lists kept a tighter lid on what could be sold as a cosmetic or medicated cosmetic. In the US, enforcement looked like warning letters and hazard communications. OSHA reminded salons they had to treat these as chemical exposures, ventilation, training, safety data sheets. State agencies issued alerts when testing found formaldehyde well above what labels claimed. The FDA sent warning letters to brands that misbranded formaldehyde-free products that under heat released the gas. But bans were slower, fragmented, and sometimes stalled by legal challenges over definitions. Is methylene glycol just formaldehyde in water or something else? In practice, when you iron it at salon temps, the distinction disappears into the air. Formaldehyde-free turned into a marketing mirage. Products used formaldehyde releasers and leaned on the fact that the bottle at room temperature measured low. Heat changed the chemistry. Air monitoring told the truth. Salon associations and unions started pushing for safer alternatives and better ventilation standards. Some municipalities required fume extraction. Others left it to salon owners to figure out. The same owners balancing payroll, client demand, and the cost of installing a capture hood above every flat iron station. Industry responded with new chemistries, carbocystine-based smoothers, lower heat processes, acids that altered hair's hydrogen bonding without the same off-gassing profile. They promised comparable results without the headaches. Results varied. Some clients lost less curl than they wanted. Others were happy to trade a bit of frizz control for breathing easy. Meanwhile, plaintiffs, attorneys filed cases for respiratory symptoms and sensitization in stylists, pulling internal documents where brands debated labeling and lab methods. Air sampling became evident. A stylist in Newark faced the old calculus. Keep offering the lucrative service or drop it and risk losing regulars. She tried a formaldehyde-free line, then bought her own handheld monitor. On high-heat passes, readings still spiked. She called the distributor. They said her technique was wrong. She called OSHA. They said ventilate and log exposures. She made a choice: raise prices, cap bookings, add a portable fume extractor, and stop at-home kit sales altogether. Some clients left. Most stayed. Her headaches eased. The U.S. conversation kept inching toward prohibition. States proposed bans on formaldehyde in hair straighteners. Advocates argued salon workers, disproportionately women of color, shouldn't be the canaries for style standards. Federally, formaldehyde remains a known hazard, and agencies guide employers on exposure limits, but consumer product bans move slowly without a clear statutory hook. MoCRA modernizes cosmetics oversight, facility registration, product listing, serious adverse event reporting, records access. But it doesn't list specific banned substances by default. It gives FDA leverage to ask for safety substantiation and to act when products are adulterated or misbranded. That matters when a label says formaldehyde-free and the iron proves otherwise. Europe's faster bans weren't a magic wand. Black market imports and relabeled products popped up and inspectors chased them. But the baseline changed. If you heat seal hair in a cloud of formaldehyde, you're off the market. Japan's baseline was even simpler. If it isn't on the allowed list, it doesn't go in. The human story is the same across borders. A client sits in a chair, trusting the person behind her with scissors and chemistry. The person behind her wants her to look good, come back, and not get sick doing it. Masks help. Ventilation helps. Honest labels help. The easiest fix is cultural. Rethink beauty standards that make straight the default. The practical fix is technical. Use processes that don't gas off carcinogens and regulate them like you mean it. In the end, a salon is a workplace before it's a makeover studio. Worker protections aren't extras, they're the product. When the billows of shine arrive with an invisible cost, the safer service is the only service worth selling. And if heat and fumes rattled the salon, the painkiller shelf, quiet, familiar, was about to draw a different line. Relief at what price and for how long? Painkillers, Ibuprofen, Diclofenac, and the Cardiovascular line. The pain aisle looks simple. Red boxes, blue boxes, something for backs, something for knees. But those colors hide a line most shoppers don't see, the line where relief starts to tangle with the heart. NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, work by turning down enzymes called COX-1 and COX-2, which help make prostaglandins that drive pain and swelling. Turn them down, pain drops. Turn them down too far or too long, and other systems feel it. Stomach lining thins, kidneys struggle, blood pressure nudges up, and in some cases, the cardiovascular risk needle moves. In the US, the shelf is dominated by ibuprofen and naproxen. Diclofenac exists, but mostly as a topical gel over the counter. Oral diclofenac is prescription only. That wasn't an accident. Over the last decade, studies linked diclofenac, especially in oral form, to higher cardiovascular risks compared with some other NSAIDs. Europe felt that debate earlier. Several EU markets pulled oral diclofenac into pharmacy-only or tightened indications, with pharmacists acting as gatekeepers for short courses in low-risk adults. In some places, low-dose oral diclofenac remained OTC but under stricter counsel. The principle was simple. The stronger the systemic punch, the more human judgment you insert before the sale. Meanwhile, ibuprofen held its place on US shelves because, at over-the-counter doses and durations, its risk profile is understood and manageable if you follow the label. Naproxen earned a reputation, in some analyses, for a potentially lower cardiovascular signal, but the GI trade-off can be rougher. None of these are risk-free. The FDA added class-wide warnings about heart attack and stroke for non-aspirin NSAIDs, strengthened in 2015 to say the risk can rise as early as the first weeks and increases with dose and duration. Labels grew dense. The aisle stayed bright. Here's where it gets human. A weekend warrior in his 40s tweaks his knee at a pickup game. He takes 400 mg of ibuprofen. The swelling falls a notch. He wants to sleep that night, so he adds another dose and another. Then he stacks in a multi-symptom cold medicine because his kid brought home a virus. He doesn't notice the fine print. That combo also contains an NSAID. By Monday, his stomach burns, he's lightheaded, and he wonders if it's the cold. It's the stack. In Dublin, that same guy would likely hit a pharmacy counter. The pharmacist might hand over a short ibuprofen course and ask about history, ulcers, blood thinners, blood pressure, any heart disease. They might steer him to topical diclofenac for localized pain, less systemic exposure, solid relief for joints near the surface. The US has that gel too, over-the-counter diclofenac 1%, but many shoppers still reach for pills first because that's the habit. Topical versus oral is the quiet revolution here. For knee osteoarthritis, tendinopathy near the surface, or small joint pain in hands, topical Diclofenac delivers meaningful relief with lower systemic levels. In Europe, topical NSAIDs have long played a starring role. In the US, the gel went OTC more recently, and adoption is growing. It's a safer default for a lot of weekend injuries, especially in older adults who shouldn't be loading their stomachs or kidneys with daily pills. Science doesn't hand out halos. NSAIDs as a class raise cardiovascular risk in varying degrees. The differences depend on dosage, COX selectivity, and patient baseline risk. High-dose ibuprofen can nudge blood pressure and interact with low-dose aspirin's antiplatelet effect if timed poorly. Diclofenac's oral form shows a higher cardiovascular signal in several observational studies. Naproxen may be kinder to the heart in some analyses, but harsher to the gut. Dose and duration are the levers. So are age, smoking, diabetes, and existing heart disease. Labels try to speak this in small fonts. Use the lowest effective dose for the shortest duration. It sounds like boilerplate until you realize it's the safety strategy. The EU's advantage is the human who repeats it and adapts it. The US advantage is access at midnight without a conversation. Both systems fail when people treat painkillers like candy. A nurse tells a story she repeats to patients. During marathon season, she sees runners with black stools after just Advil. Just meant 800 mg 3 times daily for a week, then a long run on an empty stomach. She now keeps a simple script. Start topical for localized pain, reserve pills for flare windows, take with food, hydrate, and if you're on aspirin for your heart, separate the timing or ask your doctor about naproxen or alternative. The difference in shelves also shows up in expectations. In many EU pharmacies, oral Diclofenac isn't an impulse buy. Pharmacists ask, "What's the pain? How long? What else are you taking?" In the US, that gatekeeping is optional. The gel meets you at eye level. The pills sit one shelf over, smiling. The safer path is there. It just doesn't wave. Then the outlier, the elderly neighbor with a sore shoulder and a long list, hypertension, chronic kidney disease, low-dose aspirin. For him, an NSAID isn't trivial. Acetaminophen might be the first stop with all the caveats about liver dose limits. A short topical NSAID course can help, but pills could push kidneys into trouble. In Europe, a pharmacist might block the sale and call the GP. In the US, he's on his own unless someone steps in. So what's the playbook? For healthy adults with short-term musculoskeletal pain, start with topical Diclofenac for joints and tendons near the skin. If you need pills, pick the minimum dose, shortest duration, and respect your stomach and heart. If you're over 65 on a blood thinner, have heart disease, kidney issues, or ulcers, treat NSAIDs like power tools, only with guidance. And if you're comparing countries, remember what the shelves are really saying. Europe puts a person between you and the risk. America puts a label. Decongestants that do work, and their risks. Pseudoephedrine. While phenylephrine's promise faded, the old workhorse never left. It just moved. Pseudoephedrine still shrinks swollen nasal vessels when you swallow it. It's the pill that actually opens airways for a lot of people. The catch is the door you have to walk through to get it. In 2005, the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act turned a pharmacy counter into a checkpoint. Pseudoephedrine became a behind-the-counter sale. Show ID, sign a log, respect daily and 30-day limits, and expect your purchase to ping a national tracking system. The goal was simple: throttle meth labs by choking their favorite precursor. It worked in one sense. Domestic meth labs crashed in many states, but the medicine didn't vanish, and neither did the cold. A parent knows the drill. It's 2 a.m., the toddler's asleep at last, and your head is a cement block. The shelf option didn't help. You line up at the 24-hour pharmacy window with a driver's license and a prayer that you're not over the monthly cap because allergy season has been brutal. The technician asks your birth date, taps a screen, and hands over the only pill that's likely to buy you sleep. Relief arrives with a little paperwork. Here's the pharmacology that drives the trade-off. Pseudoephedrine is a systemic sympathomimetic. It constricts blood vessels in the nasal mucosa, but not only there. For some, it brings jitteriness, a racing heart, insomnia, and blood pressure bumps. For others, it's smooth sailing and a clear nose. Labels warn people with hypertension, heart disease, thyroid issues, or prostate enlargement to talk to a doctor. The advice isn't decoration, it's risk sorting. Meanwhile, Europe kept a person in the loop. In many EU countries, pseudoephedrine is pharmacy only. You can buy it without a prescription, but you won't pluck it from a shelf. A pharmacist asks the quick questions: blood pressure, other meds, how long are the symptoms? Then hands over a short course. Some markets tightened even more after diversion concerns, but counseling stayed the constant. Japan charted a different path, tighter combinations and doses of cold medicines under its own rules, with sympathomimetics in carefully set packages and stronger products held behind the pharmacy gate. Back in the US, the counter rules did more than block meth cooks. They changed consumer behavior. Some people stopped bothering and lived with congestion, or they leaned into nasal sprays. Topical decongestants like oxymetazoline work fast, but overuse triggers rebound, rhinitis medicamentosa that entrenches misery. Others embraced saline rinses and humidifiers. But the line at the counter never disappeared, because for many, pseudoephedrine remains the difference between functioning and fog. A pharmacist in Kansas keeps a mental flowchart. If the customer has healthy blood pressure, no arrhythmia history, and needs a night of sleep, a small pack of immediate-release pseudoephedrine can be a reasonable bet. Lowest dose that helps, earlier in the day if they're sensitive, and never stack with other stimulants. If they're on multiple antihypertensives, the pharmacist steers toward non-drug options or topical routes, and if they insist, calls the prescriber. The conversation takes 2 minutes. The risk reduction is real. The law also scattered annoyance. Vacation travelers hit caps in one state after buying in another. Couples learn to alternate who buys during pollen spikes. College students who combined pseudoephedrine with energy drinks found out why palpitations isn't just a label word. And overnight workers discovered the cruel irony. The pill that clears your head can steal your sleep. Diversion did drop with tracking systems, but meth supply shifted to imports and new synth routes. The policy win on labs didn't erase the drug problem, it just changed its shape. That left pharmacies in a permanent middle role, healthcare on one side, law enforcement on the other. Most days it's ordinary, some days it is. Here's the nuance most people never hear. Extended release pseudoephedrine smooths peaks and can feel gentler, but it can also keep you awake longer. Immediate release hits faster and leaves sooner. It's better for daytime bursts or early evening use if sleep matters. Stacking with caffeine is a common cell phone. Pairing it with certain antidepressants or MAO inhibitors can get dangerous fast. That's why the EU model of a quick consult works. It catches the edge cases before they become ER visit. A dad in Phoenix solved his winter plan like a quartermaster. He keeps a small box of pseudoephedrine for crisis nights, saline and a humidifier for baseline, an antihistamine for allergy flares, and a sticky note. No doses after 4 p.m. He's not a chemist. He's tired. The kit saves him from guesswork. Phenylephrine's fall made the message blunt. If you want a pill that truly decongests, pseudoephedrine is the over-the-counter option that works if you're the right candidate and you respect the side effects. The counter isn't there to shame you. It's there to make sure the relief you're buying doesn't cost you something bigger. Supplements versus medicines. DSHEA's shadow. Walk 3 steps from the painkillers and you fall into another world. Powders, gummies, tinctures with names that promise calm, focus, shred, glow. Same store, different rulebook. The stakes are quiet but huge. Half of Americans use supplements. Most assume if it's on the shelf, someone checked it like a drug. They didn't. To understand why, we need to go back to 1994. Congress passed the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, DSHEA. It drew a bright line. Vitamins, minerals, herbs, amino acids, and other dietary substances could be sold without pre-market approval, as long as companies didn't make disease claims and followed good manufacturing practices. The burden shifted. Instead of proving safety and efficacy before launch, companies had to ensure products weren't adulterated or misbranded and respond if FDA acted after problems surfaced. Labels could use structure-function claims, supports immune health, with a tiny disclaimer. This statement hasn't been evaluated by the FDA. That model unlocked an industry. It also created shadows. Newer ingredients called new dietary ingredients are supposed to be notified to FDA with safety data if they weren't marketed before 1994. Many launches skipped that step. Enforcement exists, warning letters, seizures, criminal cases, but it's post-market and selective. Meanwhile, glossy bottles multiply. Here's a case that cut through the noise. Ephedra, an herbal stimulant, was popular in weight loss and performance stacks through the 199s. Reports of heart problems and deaths piled up. In 2004, after years of litigation and contested science, FDA banned ephedra in dietary supplements, citing unreasonable risk. The industry yelled overreach. Courts eventually upheld the ban. The takeaway was clear. FDA can act, but only after harm, and it's slow. decade later, DMAA showed the pattern again. Marketed as a natural extract, it was in fact a synthetic stimulant in many products. Military base hospitals flagged spikes in adverse events. FDA sent warning letters, seizures followed. Companies reformulated, some rebranded the same buzz with new acronyms. Consumers were left reading labels like detectives, never sure what the proprietary blend really meant. Kratom sits in a gray zone now, an herbal with opioid-like effects that some swear eases pain or helps with withdrawal, and others warn can addict fast. Some states ban it, others regulate it. Federally, it stays in limbo while FDA warns about risks and seizures contaminated products. Stores sell it next to multivitamins. The aisle blurs. Europe and Japan built different guardrails. The EU treats many botanicals as traditional herbal medicinal products or foods with novel food rules, which often require pre-market safety reviews and limit claims sharply. A capsule that supports liver health in the US might be a medicine requiring approval in Germany. Claims are policed. You don't see boosts immunity without authorized wording. Japan routes many actives into foods with function claims. FFC. Foods for specified health uses, FOSHU, or quasi-drugs, each with its own data demands and label discipline. The result is fewer Wild West blends and fewer disease-adjacent promises. What nobody tells you at checkout is how often supplements get tainted. FDA and independent labs have found hidden drugs in natural weight loss, sexual enhancement, and bodybuilding products, sibutramine, sildenafil, steroids, because results sell. Labels don't declare them, tests do. An amateur cyclist learned that in the worst way. He took a fat burner his coach swore by, passed the sniff test, green label, plant names, then failed a drug test at a regional race. The lab found a stimulant that wasn't on the label. His season was over. The bottle stayed for sale online. DSHEA didn't intend that outcome. It assumed honest actors and gave FDA recall and adulteration tools when things went wrong, but it also assumed consumers could parse claims. Clinically tested might mean a tiny pilot study with no control group. Doctor formulated might mean a consultant signed off on the flavor. Proprietary blend can hide dosages so you can't tell if there's pixie dust or a therapeutic amount. There are bright spots. Third-party certifications, USB, NSF, informed choice, verify what's in the bottle and test for contaminants. Reputable brands publish batch testing, list exact doses, and avoid disease claims. Retailers add no lists and demand certificates of analysis. DSHEA doesn't forbid rigor, it just doesn't force it up front. MoCRA won't fix supplements, it's a cosmetics law. The CARES Act reorganized OTC drug monographs. Supplements still live under DSHEA's umbrella. That means the burden is on shoppers to close the gap with strategy. Start with purpose. Are you correcting a deficiency or chasing a promise? Deficiencies have lab tests and RDA targets. Promises have hashtags. Check for third-party seals. Avoid proprietary blends when dosage matters. Creatine, beta-alanine, melatonin. Be careful with categories prone to adulteration. Weight loss, sexual enhancement, bodybuilding. If a product claims drug-like effects, it's waving a red flag. In Europe, you'd meet more friction. Fewer claims, approved monographs for traditional herbs, pharmacists who know which plant interacts with your blood thinner. In Japan, you'd see the PA mark on sunscreens and a similar discipline in functional foods, categories with defined ingredients and sealings. In the US, you see slogans. Freedom feels nice until it produces a surprise on a urine test or a trip to urgent care. A final human moment. A nurse practitioner keeps 2 shelves in her clinic. Shelf A, vitamin D, iron, B12, omega-3s from verified suppliers with dosing handouts and lab follow-up plans. Shelf B, a graveyard of bottles patients brought in greens powders with fairy-dusted adaptogens, NMN with no quality seal, pre-workouts with 10 stimulants under a blend. She doesn't shame anyone. She opens DSHEA in a sentence. Drugs prove themselves first. Supplements prove themselves if something goes wrong. Then she sends them to shelf A or to food. The supplement aisle isn't a scam. It's a system that rewards trust and punishes naivete. Under DSHEA, the safety net is below you, not above. Step carefully. Oral care, Triclosan, Peroxides, and microbes. Even toothpaste has a backstory. We treat it like soap for teeth, foam, mint, spit, done, but oral care sits at the intersection of drugs, cosmetics, and microbes we live with every day. The stakes are daily exposure and a mouth that isn't sterile, it's an ecosystem. If you blunt the wrong bugs or push the wrong chemistry, you don't just freshen breath, you shift a community. Start with Triclosan. For years, antibacterial was a selling point. Triclosan showed up in hand soaps, body washes, and some US toothpastes. Then the data diverged by category. In 2016, the FDA banned Triclosan from consumer hand soaps after concluding it wasn't more effective than plain soap and water and raised questions about endocrine effects and bacterial resistance. But it stayed in some toothpastes because, in that specific use, controlled trials showed reduced plaque and gingivitis. Same molecule, different context, different call. Europe trimmed earlier and wider. The EU restricted Triclosan in cosmetics, and formulators moved away from broad-spectrum antibacterials in daily products. Japan's cautious approvals kept these claims corralled. In the US, the toothpaste exception lingered until brands quietly reformulated under pressure from retailers, consumers, and evolving risk-benefit math. The lesson isn't that FDA flipped, it's that evidence lived in niches. An antibacterial that didn't beat soap at the sink still had data for gingivitis in a tube. Meanwhile, a new worry crept in, the oral microbiome. We learned the mouth's bacterial mix feeds into nitric oxide pathways that influence blood pressure, and that carpet bombing with strong antiseptics could nudge metabolism and blood pressure for some people. Mouthwashes with big antimicrobial swings may help short-term halitosis, but everyday use isn't a free lunch. Dentists started differentiating. Therapeutic rinses for short bursts under guidance, gentler, alcohol-free options for routine, and focus on mechanical cleaning, brushing, and flossing as the backbone. Peroxides tell a parallel story. Whitening strips and pastes use hydrogen peroxide or carbamide peroxide to lift stains. At labeled concentrations and durations, they're generally safe for enamel, but they can irritate gums and sensitive teeth. Push the dose, extend the time, stack with abrasive pastes, and you can rough up enamel or inflame tissue. EU limits capped peroxide concentrations in over-the-counter products with dentist oversight for higher strength. The US left more on the shelf, trusting labels and self-selection. The outcomes split the same way. Europe inserted a professional, America inserted a warning. Then there's fluoride, the constant. Across systems, fluoride remains the one oral care active with decades of evidence for caries prevention. The differences are boring and important. Community water levels, paste concentration labeling, ppm, and guidance for kids to avoid fluorosis by using a smear, not a mound. Amid ingredient churn, fluoride stayed because cavities don't care about trend. Unknown to most shoppers, oral care sits on multiple legal rails. In the US, toothpaste with fluoride is an OTC drug under a monograph. Whitening pastes without actives live as cosmetics. Mouthwashes swing both ways. The CARES Act's shift to administrative orders modernized those monographs, making updates faster on paper. In practice, you're still looking at old actives. Stannous fluoride, sodium fluoride, zinc salts, cetylpyridinium chloride, with incremental tweaks rather than bold new antimicrobial. Europe's cosmetics regulation pulls in safety assessments even for products that feel basic, and ingredient restrictions cascade into rinses and pastes. Allergen disclosure rules bite on flavors, limonene, linalool, so people with contact cheilitis can actually see triggers. In the US, flavor hides a lot. MoCRA will require fragrance allergen disclosure in cosmetics, which will tighten oral care transparency for non-drug components, but timelines and specifics are still rolling out. A dentist we followed keeps it simple. For gingivitis, she prescribes short courses of chlorhexidine or essential oil rinses, warns about staining, and focuses on technique. A soft brush, 2 minutes, twice daily, and interdental cleaning. For sensitivity, she swaps patients to stannous fluoride or potassium nitrate pastes and pulls whitening for a month. For heavy coffee drinkers chasing white smiles, she recalibrates expectations. Peroxide helps with extrinsic stains. It won't rewrite enamel genetics, and overuse bites back. Contamination reminded everyone that even rinse and spit products need scrutiny. When benzene recalls hit aerosol sunscreens and later some dry shampoos, oral care brands looked at propellants and solvents in breath sprays and foams, bolstering supplier audits. The theme repeats. Sometimes risk isn't the headline ingredient, it's what sneaks in from the supply chain. Practically, what should a shopper do tomorrow? Keep fluoride. If you want antibacterial help, consider stannous fluoride or zinc in pastes and use antiseptic rinses as time-limited tools, not daily crutches. If whitening matters, pick lower peroxide regimens, respect the clock, and pause if sensitivity spikes. If your lips crack or burn, try pastes without sodium lauryl sulfate and with full-flavor allergen disclosure. Easier to find in EU imports for now. And if a product screams antibacterial, ask whether you need a sledgehammer for a job a toothbrush solves. The mouth isn't a battlefield, it's a neighborhood. Good neighborhoods thrive with regular sweeping, not nightly SWAT raids. Skin treatments, benzoyl peroxide, retinoids, and steroids. Back to skin where small tubes carry big stakes. Acne, eczema, rashes, these aren't abstract. They're first dates, job interviews, school photos. The aisle offers fixes that can help or make things worse depending on strength, frequency, and whose rulebook set the limit. Start with benzoyl peroxide. It's old, blunt, and effective. It kills acne bacteria, loosens pores, and doesn't create resistance. In the US, you'll find it everywhere, 5% to 10% as an OTC acne active under the monograph. Higher isn't always better. Studies show 2.5% can work as well as 10% with less irritation. Europe allows it too, often steering people toward lower strengths and pairing with pharmacy guidance when combinations get complex. Japan routes many medicated acne products through the quasi-drug path with defined concentrations and claims. The chemistry is the same, the gatekeeping is. Then retinoids, vitamin A derivatives that change skin behavior. They speed turnover, prevent clogged pores, and over time smooth fine lines. They're also irritating at first and carry pregnancy warnings because oral retinoids are teratogenic and topical exposure needs caution. The US opened the door wider in recent years. Adapalene 0.1% went OTC, giving teenagers access to a real, evidence-backed acne tool without a prescription. Differin's move was a big deal. An RX-class retinoid stepping into self-selection with a label as the counselor. Europe never forgot the risk conversation. Retinoids there come with stronger pregnancy warnings, educational materials for prescribers and patients on oral forms, and careful messaging on topicals. OTC adapalene exists in some EU markets, but the climate around retinoids plus pregnancy stays front and center. Japan takes a conservative route. Many retinoid claims live under quasi-drug approvals or prescriptions, and cosmetics lean on retinol with tight concentration limits and measured claims. Different cultures, same molecule, different fences. Hydroquinone is the ingredient that flips the script. For decades in the US, small strength of hydroquinone sat on shelves for skin lightening and hyperpigmentation. Dermatologists used prescription strengths. Consumers bought 2% creams. Then came the CARES Act in 2020, a law you probably associate with pandemic relief, carrying a quiet rider that reformed the OTC monograph system and along the way ended OTC sales of non-prescription hydroquinone for skin lightening. Effective date, grace periods, and then gone. If you want hydroquinone now in the US, you need a prescription. Europe made that call long ago. Hydroquinone has been banned in cosmetic products in the EU for years due to safety concerns and misuse, restricted to medical supervision. Japan's stance is also tight. Cosmetics don't carry hydroquinone freely, and lightening claims live in regulated spaces with alternative actives like arbutin or tranexamic acid in defined concentrations. The US lagged, then leapt, not from panic, but from a structural law change that reclassified where this ingredient belongs. Steroids are where the aisle can hurt you if you don't know what you're holding. Low-potency topical corticosteroids, hydrocortisone, sit on US shelves for itching and mild eczema flares. They're cheap, fast, and misused sneaky. Prolonged use thins skin, triggers steroid acne, or sets up rebound when you stop. In Europe, hydrocortisone often sits pharmacy, only in many countries. You can get it without a prescription, but a pharmacist stands between you and the tube, asking where you're applying, how long, and what you've tried. Japan's quasi-drug system does similar gatekeeping. Steroid-containing products are carefully labeled, and pharmacists guide use. The US trusts labels. The EU and Japan trust a 2-minute conversation. Here's a human moment. A teen with eczema on his eyelids buys a US OTC hydrocortisone and feels instant relief. He keeps using it daily. 3 weeks later, the skin is thin, sore, and puffy. His dermatologist pulls him off, treats the rebound with a short, supervised plan, and switches him to a calcineurin inhibitor for eyelids, non-steroidal and safer long-term in thin skin areas. The message lands: the right drug, wrong place, wrong duration. Retinoids bring their own user error loop. Start nightly and many people quit from irritation. The fix is boring and effective. Pea-size amount every third night, buffer with moisturizer, step up slowly. In Europe, pharmacists often script that routine when handing over a retinoid-like product. In the US, the box tries. The YouTube video often does it better. Safety culture also shapes claims. EU labels hew close to authorized wording. Japan's quasi-drug approvals tie ingredients to specific benefits. The US leans on structure-function language and brand education. That's why an American shelf might shout retinol plus peptides plus brighteners, while a French pharmacy product quietly lists 0.3% retinol and a tolerance complex with usage steps. The former sells excitement, the latter sells a plan. Adverse event systems are catching up. Before 2022, US cosmetics had no mandatory serious adverse event reporting. MoCRA changed that. Now manufacturers have to keep safety substantiation and report serious events. That matters for leave-ons that can disrupt skin barriers over months. It won't micromanage concentrations, but it creates a paper trail. Benzoyl peroxide adds a practical twist. It bleaches fabric. That's not a regulatory story, it's a life story. A student ruins pillowcases and quits a routine that was working. A pharmacist in Barcelona would have warned her. A US label did, but she didn't read it. Human factors beat chemistry every time. So what's the smart path tomorrow? For acne, pair a low-strength benzoyl peroxide in the morning with adapalene at night if you tolerate it. Step up slowly and expect a 6 to 12-week horizon. For melasma or dark spots, talk to a clinician about prescription hydroquinone cycles or non-hydroquinone options. Azelaic acid retinoids, sun discipline, with strict UVA protection, ideally to EU-Japan standards until US filters catch up. For eczema, use hydrocortisone for short bursts on thick skin, not as a daily moisturizer, and get non-steroidal options and emollients right. And everywhere, remember pregnancy warnings with retinoids. If there's any chance, hit pause and ask. Different shelves, same faces. The rules change, but skin listens to routine, patience, and honest labels more than hype. The gatekeeper can be a pharmacist or it can be your plan. Either way, the safest fix is the one you can follow without creating a new problem. Fragrance, allergens, and PFAS, the invisible additives. By now you've seen how the big actives shape outcomes. The quieter story lives in the extras, the scent that makes a lotion pleasant, the slip that makes a mascara glide, the finish that keeps makeup from melting in July. These are invisible until your skin breaks out or your eyes burn. That's where the shelves split again. Fragrance is the friendliest word on a label and the least informative. In the US, fragrance can bundle dozens of compounds under one line. If you're sensitive to one specific allergen, you're guessing. In Europe, the rules expose more. The cosmetics regulation requires disclosure of a list of fragrance allergens, things like limonene, linalool, citral, geraniol, once they pass small thresholds, because sensitization happens at tiny doses repeated daily. That lets someone with a history of contact dermatitis scan a label and avoid their trigger. In the US, you'll still see fragrance as a catch-all. MoCRA will force fragrance allergen disclosure in coming rulemaking, but it isn't live yet and the list isn't final. Until then, the US shopper has less visibility. A nurse on a medical floor learned this the slow way. Years of hand-washing and sanitizer use left her knuckles cracked and her wrists flaming. She switched to fragrance-free moisturizers, true fragrance-free, not unscented with masking fragrances, and within a month, the fissures calmed. Her fix wasn't exotic. It was avoiding the one ingredient that made everything nicer for everyone else and miserable for her. She now teaches new hires a simple triage. Fragrance-free at work, patch test new products, and keep a short list of safe brands. Meanwhile, another invisible set of letters crept into headlines. PFAS, the forever chemicals. They're a broad family used for water resistance, slip, and durability in everything from raincoats to mascara. In beauty, sometimes they're intentionally added. Sometimes they hitchhike as impurities or form through processing. Investigations found PFAS signatures in waterproof mascaras and longwear products. Consumers heard forever chemicals and thought drinking water, cancer, headlines. Regulators heard the same and reached for levers. Europe moved faster again. pushing toward wide PFAS restrictions under chemicals law and scrutinizing intentional use in cosmetics. Member states proposed sweeping bans with limited exemptions. In the U.S., federal action lagged, but states like Maine and California passed laws phasing out or restricting PFAS in certain product categories, including cosmetics. MoCRA didn't list PFAS, but it raised the bar on safety substantiation and gave FDA access to records and the power to inspect, which pressures brands to map where fluorinated chemistry shows up. Retailers filled the gap with no PFAS policies, and brands scrambled to match long-wear performance without fluorine. This is where dose and route matter and get messy. A mascara worn near the eyes isn't the same as a non-stick pan or contaminated water, but repeated daily use near mucous membranes still deserves scrutiny, and the forever part isn't about your body alone, it's about persistence in the environment. For many shoppers, the practical answer is simple. If there's a comparable non-FOS product that stays put, take the easy win. Microplastics add another layer. Europe has been moving to restrict intentionally added microplastics in rinse-off products, and proposals target leave-ons too. That nudges formulators away from certain film formers and beads. The U.S. ban on plastic microbeads in rinse-off cosmetics landed years ago, but broader microplastic policies trail European timeline. Again, retailer standards often jump first, and ingredient houses pivot to biodegradable polymers that mimic performance. Back to fragrance, because transparency does more than calm rashes, it changes trust. When an EU label lists allergens, it also teaches you to read. Over time, you learn your patterns. Maybe oak moss triggers you, maybe it doesn't. In the US, fragrance stays a black box until MoCRA's allergen rule lands. That's why people with eczema buy European pharmacy moisturizers. Not because they're magic, but because the label helps them play defense. Industry isn't the villain here, it's the physics. People want lipsticks that don't smear, mascaras that don't flake, and sunscreens that don't feel greasy. Slip and durability come from chemistry knobs you can't see. Pull PFAS and you need new film formers, resins, silicones, or hybrid systems to keep performance. Some swaps work, some crack under heat. This is why you see new formula tags that spark love and hate online. What nobody knew in the aisle is how much retailer policies now write the rules. A big box no list that bans certain formaldehyde releasers, PFAS, and coal tar dyes can move markets faster than a federal docket. Brands reformulate to keep shelf space. Smaller brands launch fragrance-free lines to capture sensitive users. Meanwhile, state laws create patchworks that national brands meet by harmonizing up. The strictest rule becomes the default. So what do you do tomorrow without panic? If your skin is reactive, start with fragrance-free where it counts. Moisturizers, leave-on face products, hand creams. Unscented isn't the same. It can hide masking scents. If you love fragrance, use it intentionally. Perfume on clothing or hair, not as a surprise in everything. For makeup, scan brand statements about PFAS. Pick waterproof only when you need it. Test non-FOS long-wear products that use new polymers. If your hands crack, look for EU-style allergen disclosure or brands that publish full fragrance breakdown. And if you're tired of decoding, make the shelf work for you. Lean on retailer no lists, look for third-party vetted lines, and keep a small roster of products that you tolerate. When a formula changes, patch test, not face test. The invisible additives aren't evil, they're choices. In Europe and Japan, regulators push those choices toward transparency and restraint. In the US, MoCRA is opening the blind. Until the light is fully on, your best tool is a shorter ingredient list and a habit of reading the one line most people skip. Recalls, black box warnings, and the paper trail. While shoppers argued about filters and fragrances, another force was shaping shelves. Paperwork. Recalls, label changes, black box warnings, none of it starts in an aisle. It starts in a lab, a factory, or a clinic note that doesn't look like a crisis until it stacks. Take cough syrups. They seem harmless, sweet, sticky comfort, but contamination isn't a theory. When diethylene glycol or ethylene glycol slips into glycerin or propylene glycol supplies, the result can be lethal. The U.S. has lived through warning letters and seizures tied to tainted excipients. Abroad, tragedies drove sweeping recalls and criminal probes. In this world, a spec isn't a suggestion, it's a lifeline. The label doesn't show it, the batch record does. Then came ranitidine. For decades, it was the go-to heartburn pill. In 2019, labs began detecting NDMA, an impurity linked to cancer risk in ranitidine products. It wasn't just sloppy manufacturing. The molecule itself could degrade into NDMA under heat and time. The FDA first advised caution in 2019, then in 2020 requested market withdrawal. Pharmacies cleared shelves overnight. Patients learned a new vocabulary word and a new habit. Don't store meds in hot cars or steamy bathrooms. Alternatives like famotidine stepped in. The lesson was brutal and simple. Chemistry doesn't care that something's been safe for 30 years if the storage and degradation math changes. Sunscreen got hit next, not for filters but for fuel. Independent testing found benzene, a known human carcinogen, in some aerosol sunscreens and later dry shampoos. The culprit traced back to contaminated propellants and solvents in the supply chain. Brands issued voluntary recalls, sometimes massive. The FDA urged testing and supplier audits. Consumers stared at half-used cans and asked the only question that matters at 7 a.m. in July: is it safe? The answer became a behavior change. More lotions, fewer sprays, more eyes on batch numbers and recall lists. What nobody knew at the time is almost always the supply chain. Solvents, propellants, plastic packaging, storage temperatures, tiny variables that turn into big headlines. A QA chemist at a contract manufacturer told us about a pattern she couldn't shake: trace solvent spikes in retained samples from one line. She pulled historical data, saw a drift with hotter warehouse months, and escalated. That call triggered a hold, then a recall. No press conference. Just paperwork, phone calls, and a lot of product headed for destruction. It didn't make news, it prevented it. Black box warnings live on the prescription side, but their shadow crosses the aisle. When the FDA strengthened NSAID warnings in 2015, heart attack and stroke risk can rise early, grows with dose and duration. That language didn't put a black box on ibuprofen, but it heightened every OTC counseling script. Acetaminophen carries its own quiet line in the sand: liver toxicity at high doses. Labels got explicit about daily limits and the danger of stacking multi-symptom products. The message isn't cinematic. It's a sentence you hear or don't at 2 a.m. and then live with. Europe's rapid alert system for food and feed and the cosmetic product notification portal make recalls visible across borders. A country flags an issue. The network moves product fast. The U.S. relies heavily on voluntary recalls, public notices, and an FDA recall classification process that can feel slow motion from the outside. MoCRA shifts cosmetics closer to the drug playbook. Mandatory facility registration and product listing, records access, serious adverse event reporting. That doesn't guarantee no benzene in a can, but it makes finding it and pulling it faster and raises the cost of pretending you didn't see it. Meanwhile, the CARES Act reorganized OTC monographs into an administrative order system, which sounds like paperwork. Because it is, but it matters. It lets FDA update labeling and conditions of use quicker than old rulemaking. When new safety signals land, the agency has a faster wrench. On the ground, retailers became first responders. Chains built recall teams, yanked SKUs, emailed loyalty members, and erected no lists that outpaced federal moves. For a shopper, that looks like empty space where your favorite spray used to be and a QR code to check lot numbers. For a brand, it's a calendar reminder. Validate suppliers, audit propellants, test stability at ugly temperatures, and monitor complaints like they're smoke alarm. Here's the human part. A father with reflux switches from ranitidine to famotidine and notices nothing except the trust dent. A mother tosses a recalled sunscreen and buys a lotion. A QA chemist sleeps badly for a week and then better because her hunch held. The paper trail isn't drama. It's how the aisle decides what survives. Recalls don't mean a system failed. They mean it worked late. The goal is earlier, better specs, better audits, faster alerts, and a culture that treats a strange lab spike as a siren, not a nuisance. Lobbying, laws, and the long wait. While chemists chased contaminants and pharmacists played traffic cop, another engine set the aisle's pace. Policy written in rooms the public never sees. The stakes weren't subtle. Billions in sales, careers built on SKUs, and regulators balancing speed against regret. Move too fast, and you pull useful products on thin evidence. Move too slow, and you sell hope dressed as medicine. Industry money didn't just buy ads, it bought time. Trade groups funded studies that framed questions narrowly, no evidence of harm at intended use, and pushed comment letters thick enough to stall rulemaking calendars. Citizen petitions piled up from the other side, dermatologists asking for label changes, consumer groups pushing bans, pharmacists urging pharmacy-only switches. The docket read like a courtroom without a judge. Inside FDA offices, inboxes became a bottleneck. A former reviewer told us she could open her email and see 3 realities at once. A company insisting its data proved safety, an academic tearing that data apart, and a Hill staffer asking for a briefing because a senator just got a call from a hometown manufacturer. She wasn't corrupt. She was outnumbered. The law gave her tools that worked best after products were already on shelves. Then slowly, the scaffolding shifted. The CARES Act in 2020, best known for pandemic relief, quietly rewired the OTC drug monograph system into administrative orders. That made updates faster on paper. FDA could revise labeling and conditions of use without trudging through full rulemaking. It mattered for actives like phenylephrine's neighbors and for safety warnings across categories. But a faster wrench doesn't matter if you don't pick it up. You still need data, headcount, and political cover. Cosmetics took a bigger jump with MoCRA in 2022. For the first time, the U.S. required cosmetic facility registration, product listing, records access, and mandatory serious adverse event reporting. It didn't turn FDA into a European-style pre-market gatekeeper. It did raise the floor. Now, if a brand claims its long-wear mascara is safe, it needs safety substantiation on file, and FDA can ask for it. Fragrance allergen disclosure is coming through rulemaking, inching the U.S. label toward the EU's transparency. It's not glamorous law, it's plumbing, but plumbing decides whether the house floods. Across the Atlantic, the EU Parliament leaned harder on the precautionary principle. REACH let regulators restrict families of chemicals and force data generation on manufacturers. The cosmetics regulations annexes added, pruned, and tightened with a cadence the U.S. couldn't match. Member states prodded from below, NGOs sued from the side. Companies grumbled, then reformulated, then bragged about being compliant everywhere. Europe wrote the strictest rules. Global brands harmonized up. Japan moved at its own pace, conservative, paperwork-heavy, calm. The Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare kept quasi-drugs on positive lists, demanded dossiers, and carved narrow claims. You didn't see the same exuberant U.S. label language because approval tied words to ingredients tightly. It felt slow. It avoided a lot of mess. In America, gridlock was a character in the story. Bills to overhaul cosmetics died for a decade before MoCRA finally passed. Sunscreen filters languished, even after the 2014 Sunscreen Innovation Act tried to speed things up. Every year, dermatologists testified. Every year, the queue stayed long. Industry wanted clarity, but not always the cost of new studies to cross a higher bar. FDA wanted safety data that matched modern standard. Everyone wanted to avoid the headline, where a new approval backfired. Lobbying wasn't just checks, it was choreography. A trade group would fund a safety review, then brief reporters, then seed op-eds about preserving consumer choice and innovation. Advocates countered with patient stories and lab findings, pressing for bans and disclosure. Retailers, sensitive to both, wrote their own no lists and forced changes faster than Congress could spell amendment. If you lost the retailer, you lost the season. The former FDA reviewer's inbox had one more constant: missing data. Companies would submit summaries instead of full reports, foreign post-market experience without raw numbers, or stability studies that stopped short of the abuse temperatures warehouses hit in Texas. She'd send a deficiency letter and wait. Weeks turned to months. Meanwhile, the product stayed on shelves under the old rules because the old rules allowed it. Consumers learned to import. EU sunscreens showed up in American beach bags. Japanese filters got cult status. Forums taught people to navigate customs and ingredient lists. The aisle looked like abundance. The cart whispered workaround. MoCRA, CARES, and state laws on PFAS hinted at a pivot point. Not a revolution, more like a slow turn of a cargo ship. FDA can now see more, ask for more, and move a little quicker. States can ban categories that make national brands reformulate everywhere. Retailers can drop a SKU quietly on Thursday and make a chemical irrelevant by Monday. The long wait doesn't end with a flourish. It ends with paperwork that finally bites, with brands budgeting for toxicology they used to skip, and with regulators who answer fewer emails with "we don't have authority." The aisle won't look different overnight, but the next controversy might end sooner, with fewer courtrooms and more lab books. The shopper's playbook without the panic. Tomorrow morning, you'll walk into the same aisle. Nothing will flash EU approved, Japan only, or this study says nope. So here's a playbook built from everything we've seen, simple moves that cut noise without cutting corners. Start with mindset. You're not trying to perfect a cart, you're trying to avoid obvious duds and mismatches. Evidence beats slogans. Fewer variables beat kitchen sink formulas. Pharmacy help beats guesswork, even in the US where nobody's making you ask. First, decongestants. If you need a pill that actually opens your nose, the shelf brand with phenylephrine isn't your answer. It's there, but after the FDA advisory panel concluded standard oral doses don't work, you're better off at the counter asking for Pseudoephedrine if you're a safe candidate. Bring your ID, answer 2 questions, and don't take it late in the day if sleep matters. If you've got hypertension or arrhythmias, go topical and short, oxymetazoline for no more than 3 days, or choose saline rinses and humidifiers. Make a note in your phone, no Pseudoephedrine after 4 p.m. Pain and swelling next. For sprains, tendon flare-ups, and knee pain near the surface, start with topical Diclofenac gel. It's the European habit for a reason. Less systemic exposure, real relief. If you need pills, Ibuprofen or naproxen work, but use the lowest effective dose for the shortest time and don't double up with a multi-symptom cold medicine that hides another NSAID. If you take aspirin for your heart, ask a pharmacist about timing or alternative. If you're over 65, have ulcers, kidney disease, or heart disease, treat NSAIDs like power tools. Short, cautious, and preferably supervised. Sunscreen is non-negotiable, and UVA protection is the gap in many US formulas. If you can, choose broad-spectrum lotions with strong UVA performance and reapply. If you import EU or Japanese sunscreens where legal, look for filters like Tinosorb SM or Mexoril SX, widely used abroad with excellent UVA coverage. If you're sticking to US shelves, pick SPF 30 or higher, favor lotions over sprays to dodge propellant issues, and use enough. A shot glass for a full body isn't a myth. It's the dose that makes the label true. Skin Active simplified. For acne, combine a gentle benzoyl peroxide in the morning with adapalene 0.1% at night if you tolerate it. Start slow, every 3rd night, then step up. Expect 6-12 weeks before you judge. For dark spots or melasma, hydroquinone is prescription, only in the US since the CARES Act change. Talk to a clinician if you want that route, or try azelaic acid, retinoids, vitamin C, and strict UVA protection. For eczema, use hydrocortisone for short bursts on thick skin and switch to non-steroidal options and heavy emollients for maintenance. Avoid daily steroid use on eyelids and face unless a clinician says so. Oral care stays boring on purpose. Keep fluoride toothpaste, it's still the backbone. If you want antibacterial help, stannous fluoride or zinc pastes are reasonable. Use antiseptic rinses in stints, not as daily background noise. For whitening, respect peroxide limits, pause if sensitivity spikes, and skip abrasive stacking. If you get lip or mouth irritation, try SLS-free pastes and, where possible, products that disclose fragrance allergens. Easier on EU labels for now. Fragrance and forever chemicals. If your skin is reactive, go fragrance-free for leave-ons, moisturizers, serums, hand creams. Unscented can still hide masking scents. For makeup, pick brands that commit to no intentional PFAS. Use true waterproof only when you need it. Retailer no lists help, so do third-party certifications and brands that publish full ingredient breakdown. MoCRA will bring more transparency, including fragrance allergen disclosure. But you don't have to wait to simplify. Supplements live under DSHEA's lighter touch. That means your filter matters. Ask, am I correcting a deficiency or chasing a promise? Deficiencies have tests. For products you do take, prefer ones with USB, NSF, or informed choice certification. Avoid proprietary blends where dose matters. Be skeptical of weight loss, sexual enhancement, and bodybuilding categories, hot zones for adulteration. Clinically tested on a label isn't proof. Data you can read is. Recalls and supply chains aren't your job, but you can borrow a few habits. Favor lotions over aerosols in categories where propellant contamination has popped up. Check lot numbers when a major recall is in the news. Don't store meds in hot cars or steamy bathrooms. And if a product smells off, hisses oddly, or discolors early, trust your senses and return it. When you travel, use the gatekeepers. In the EU, ask a pharmacist for topical Diclofenac, a retinoid routine with use instructions, or a UVA-strong sunscreen. In Japan, follow the quasi-drug labels and pick sunscreens with clear PA ratings for UVA. Bring home the habit, not just the bottle. A 2-minute consult changes outcomes. A dad we followed made a small home kit that covers most weeks. Pseudoephedrine for crisis nights, saline for baseline, topical Diclofenac, and a small bottle of Ibuprofen for short stints, a broad-spectrum, high-UVA sunscreen, a fragrance-free moisturizer, fluoride toothpaste, and for acne, benzoyl peroxide plus adapalene with a slow ramp. He keeps a note on his phone with 3 reminders: check actives, avoid doubles, and respect the dose. None of this asks you to panic. It asks you to swap default settings. Shelf first to pharmacist first where it matters. More actives to fewer, better ones. Vibes to labels. The aisle won't change overnight, but your cart can. And once you've built a small, boring kit that works, you spend less time reading labels and more time ignoring the aisle entirely. Every bottle on that shelf is a negotiation between evidence, law, and how much risk we'll accept to feel better fast. Rules shift, labels lag, and trust has to be earned, not assumed. If you want the next true story that links policy to real life, watch the follow-up cued on your screen. Subscribe for more untold decisions hiding in everyday products, and share this with the friend who swears by non-drowsy, cold meds.